How's it going, everybody? Welcome. So this is going to be a hybrid event. As my daughter used to call it when she had hybrid school, there's the roomies and there's the zoomies. So you all are the roomies. And I want to say hi to all the zoomies on the internet. There's a bunch of them as well. Welcome to our event. So this is the first part in a sort of community conversation series that we're part of the Civil and Environmental Engineering's Building the Future seminar series. And the broader goal of these sessions is to sort of just develop a shared understanding of all the issues facing various communities in Southeast Michigan and beyond. So real quick, before we get started, just a couple logistical items, and this is for us in here in person as well as the people online. First of all, just a real big thanks to the Stamps Art Gallery, to Sirmoy and Jennifer, who hosted us here. As you see, they have this really, really great exhibit that will be available for us to sort of tour later. Big thanks to them. The exhibit's called Flint is Family in 3 acts, and it's by Latoya Ruby Frazier, and Amber Hassan is going to be giving us the tour later at 4:45. So I hope that all of you are interested in seeing that. There'll be a reception after the event over in this room over here. The only rule is we can't bring food out into the gallery. Okay, so I'm just kind of bringing that out. For folks on Zoom, just a quick note on accessibility. We want to make sure it's accessible to everybody, and that includes closed captioning. So if you click on the live transcript on the event as it's going on, you'll be able to see what's going on, and you'll be able to read the transcript in real time. So with that in mind, I think we're ready to go. Does that sound good? We'll just get straight to the conversation. We're super excited to have everybody here. We're really excited to have everybody online. We'll introduce all the panelists one by one as part of our intro conversation. So with that in mind, I think we're good. The one thing I wanted to bring to your attention, again, this is your QR code. This is going to function in 2 ways. For those of you who don't want to ask questions in person while you're sitting there, you can type them up when you scan it. There's also small polls that we'll be pulling out throughout the event that allow you to sort of share some of your thoughts, even if you're not on the panel, because there's a lot of really interesting people here in the room as well as on the internet. We want to give everybody the opportunity to speak. So again, this is just FYI. So with that in mind, I think we're ready to go. Sound good? Okay, I will just start pacing around because that's like my thing when I teach. So for starters, we're going to take, so this is kind of the premise, we'll set the stage. We're going to take a time machine back to the year 2014. I think a lot of you know where this is hinting at, and you can't change the past. That's just one of the rules that we're going to play by right now. So here's a picture in 2014 in our time capsule of Hurricane Arthur just barreling towards the coast. Like typical stuff that we see even now, right? Hurricanes catch a lot of the news, but in another corner of the world or the country, we had this little radar picture unfolding. So this is 2014. You can see the time and date up there. It's August 11th. And it's probably somebody looking at this and going like, that looks kind of like a big storm. And somebody else might be saying like, well, how big could it be? Because the biggest storm we've ever seen was in the 60s, and that was like 2 inches. And this is the record that was set in 2014. So more than twice that record. So just for all those people who design infrastructure in this room and think about it, imagine how different it would be if you knew that the record was 4.6 inches in the 60s as opposed to later on. Would that change things? And I wonder, somebody might say, well, that's just an outlier, right? Like that's like the 500-year storm. Well, if we fast forward in our time machine to 2020, it's not that different, right? We had another event that, depending on who you ask, was like 2 to 4. So again, in the context of flooding here today, we're going to discuss some of these issues and kind of look at how they affect folks across kind of spectrum. These are the images that were pulled from the various newspapers at the kind of see in the metro region, various things that made it on the news. And you might think when we think about flooding, especially when we think about things like things, that this is coastal, but this is what the coast actually looks like. This is the FEMA floodplain over here. So the blue is what FEMA says where flooding should, right? This is kind of how we think about it at level, but all the pictures that we saw were actually not anywhere near that, right? There was flash flooding in urban environments, in neighborhoods, in people's backyards, in their basements. And so again, the way we look at flooding nationally might not match exactly how we experience it locally. So with that in mind, what I was going to introduce all of us in chronological order of how we ended up being up here in the front. So I'll just start myself and we'll kind of go down. So when I moved to Michigan in 2013, so right around this time, and I'm like it's like a perpetual technology optimist. I know that's maybe not a good thing, but I think technology can solve like literally everything. So I was like, let's just throw technology at the problem, right? So this is just like evoking that, right? Let's fix it all with technology. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. That's just like where my brain goes. And this is when I met Evan. So I met Evan Evan Pratt is the Water Resource Commissioner for Washtenaw County. I met Evan on Plymouth Road at one of the coffee shops, kind of coincidentally ran into each other. And the thing that I always really enjoyed about Evan is, so I was like the guy, let's throw technology at it. He has an uncanny ability to support people with their ideas and to cheer them on while simultaneously poking holes in those ideas. And so you walk out really energized, but then you're like, yeah, he's got a point. So anyway, I was talking to Evan over the years, and I was like, hey, how can we build this? Like, how do we do this? And so we talked over the years with Evan and with Harry and all these other folks that we were talking about of like what the cities of the future might look like. And again, this is like the sort of very heavy technology perspective of the cities of the future are going to be connected. They're going to be taking measurements, just like that self-driving car that drives itself. Water systems are going to drive themselves as well. And so we set out to build that. So we bought some valves. Brandon is here. Brandon's in this picture. Where are you, Brandon? Right there. Remember when we bought this on Amazon? Anyway, here's the valve. You take a valve and you connect it to the internet. And when you connect it, it all of a sudden allows you to change the flow of that water in real time. Whether that's good or bad, we can discuss that. But this is the kind of like, our sort of, as we started working through it and talking to Evan and others, you add these kind of systems to your infrastructure and it allows you to sort of dynamically steer those flows. And the thing that we kind of learned together, and this is, I think, your wording that I really picked up on when we talked about it, Evan. I think you said some time ago that this allows you to squeeze more performance out of the infrastructure. So oftentimes we look at our infrastructure and we say like, there's nothing more flooding. I really latched onto those words when you said this. No matter what it does, there's the ability to squeeze more out of it. You just kind of have to look at it. I don't know if you remember this hydrograph that we put together a long time ago, but there it is. So with that in mind, we're going to introduce each one of our panelists by having sentence right now. So we're going to introduce each one of them in chronological order. And the sentence that we want everybody to address is a flood resilient Southeast Michigan ... And I'll just leave it to everybody to answer quickly. I want you to think about it for yourself as well. And then we'll put up the poll later. So Evan, please.
Yeah, I'd say a flood resilient Michigan means that in the next couple of decades, we're going to find strategies to reduce the frequency and severity of flooding on the most cost-effective basis. And that really means we've actually got to be thinking in 50 and 80-year, 100-year chunks about what are those strategies going to produce.
Awesome. Thanks, Evan. So think about it for yourself too. Flood resilient Michigan ... Our next panelist, Rebecca Esselman, director of the Huron River Watershed Council. Rebecca, I went back to my first email that I ever saw, like when I met you, and I dug it up. It was March 26, 2013. Do you remember that event? You hosted an event. This was, this is quite a while, on creating climate resilient communities. And I walked to this meeting and Rebecca had this amazing ability to look at the overall watershed that, she was working in, all the various people, including all these dams and reservoirs that were in there, and kind of think big picture of each one of them as solving their individual problems, but maybe somehow we can get them to coordinate with each other to sort of restore the watershed's ecology or kind of get it to function in a way that we can kind of hope it will function at a large scale. So I was like, hey, you want some technology? So anyway, so there we are. We started building some sensors, right? So these are the sensors. Basically what they are is just they're connected to the internet. They take a bunch of measurements. They tell you what's happening in the field, whether that's water level or quality, and the students build those. We got a bunch of students back there who are part of this lab and kind of working on these things. They assemble them, they deploy them, they start taking the measurements, and this network keeps growing and growing and growing. Effectively, what you is a watershed that is in some ways connected to the internet. Again, pros and cons of that, but we're in the process right now of exploring ways to sort of use this data to help guide the performance of this watershed or its controls towards some outcomes. So with that in mind, that's how we met. And Rebecca, I'll just leave it to you to maybe introduce yourself via that sentence that we talked about.
Yeah, and I want to share that my counterpoint to Broncos is that I'm always the one that says nature will fix the problems, not technology. So it's a good yin and yang, I think, in our working relationship. I have to do that with my father-in-law as well. He's an engineer. A climate or a flood resilient Southeast Michigan is one that manages water at the watershed scale.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. Okay. And so we'll introduce our third panelist. So is Irma Leppard. I met Irma more than a few years ago, actually. And Irma just seems like perpetually positive about all the change that can be made, I feel like, in the world. And that's really, that doesn't just infect me, but the lab. And so Irma's been working with the Sierra Club in Detroit and the Friends of the Rain Gardens to the Rescue program in the city. And so we were like, hey, you want some technology? So that's basically how this kind of started. But like the one thing that I really thought was interesting in working with you over the years was just how open you were to taking these measurements and to discovering if it works. The point is like you were open to the fact that it might not. And what that's kind of interesting. I think a lot of us say that, right? We say we have these cool ideas, we want them to work, and if they don't work, oh well. But actually a lot of people latch on to their ideas. And we always enjoyed working with you because you were so open and transparent about topics. And so we teamed up and we deployed these green infrastructure sensors that were measuring like real-time performance and infiltration. And here's a bunch of the students and kind of teaming up on deploying this network. There's a bunch of devices out there right now that are measuring all this GI throughout the city, and it leads to a lot of data. So again, not here to analyze this data, but just to say that this opens up the opportunity to really start creating of what these systems behave like at a really granular scale, right? So then when we can almost personalize our stormwater infrastructure based on whatever works best in your part. But again, that's just the beginning days of this. We haven't even scratched the surface of it. But with that in mind, I'll just have Irma introduce herself. Please, Irma.
Thank you, Branko. So yes, I'm the optimist, and I'm also the yes and person. So I believe that it's both nature and technology. So maybe it's nice I'm sitting here in the middle, bridging the two. But I believe that climate resilient, flooding resilient community, state, city would first of all take into consideration the fact that we are in the region with the most fresh water, our Great Lakes, the largest body of fresh surface water in the world. And that whatever we do, it has to be with that in mind. And how do we protect it, keep it safe from harm and threats? And that includes flooding and sewage overflows and that kind of thing. And resiliency will be, we will maintain this water body as a healthy water body for years to come, for generations to come.
Awesome. Thank you, Irma. So we'll actually intentionally close off this technology part of this because that was not the intended point of this workshop, but we just kind of wanted to show how we got to meet everybody along the way. If anybody wants this data, it's freely available. You can download it. It's all streaming. With that in mind, I kind of want to just bring this to your attention. We're gonna just move over and start the conversation, right? So this wasn't supposed to be a presentation necessarily in whole, but instead we'll do this. So go ahead, we'll pull up this thing right now. We'll have everybody do the next poll that we set up right here, which is basically you answering this question for yourself. So what I'll do is I will pull up the web browser and start us on this question. So it looks like a bunch of people are doing four. So thank you for filling out the questions over here. So it looks like a bunch of people are fours. Good. Hello, fellow fives. Okay, cool. So what I'll do is I'll start us on the second poll and I'll walk over to the panel. So it started over here. As you type your stuff out, it'll pop up just as a kind of interactive feature, and we'll get back to this in a little bit. If you're using the app, there's a Q&A button on the top. So on the top, you see Q&A or poll. If you hit Q&A, you can start logging your questions, and then we'll ask those to the panelists as we go along. Or for those of you in the room, you can obviously raise your hand and we'll get to you to ask. So shall we start? Thank you all. So again, just to sort of preface this, the overall goal of this get together right now is to sort of develop a shared understanding of how various groups and people experience flooding. So it's actually not about technology at all. I want to zoom out from that and keep the conversation fairly broad. Also, that said, we are at a university. So if anybody has feedback about the role of universities in any of this, whether that's, stimulating conversations or working on solutions, feel free to share them and we'll go from there. So good. Okay. Thank you all. Okay, so we'll start off because we're close to Halloween. We'll start off with a scary question first. So maybe we'll just start off with Rebecca. We'll just ask everybody this question. What keeps you up at night?
I mean, frankly, it's probably my kids and midterm elections, but on topic, thinking about flooding and climate change and natural resource management, I think what keeps me up at night or what's a bit overwhelming is the complexity of the problem and how do we get all of the, policies, practices, people lined up and coordinated towards some shared vision of success. And I think, untangling that web and getting us all on the same page and moving forward is one of the most daunting aspects of this work.
Yeah. Thank you. Irma.
Pardon me. So I actually do stay up at night sometime worrying about this, but it's basically our inaction on climate change. And the fact that, we're seeing the impacts, right? Flooding, drought, heat waves, all of that. But, species extinction and loss of biodiversity, I wanted to mention those. But I worry the people who have the greatest influence, the greatest ability to have an impact in terms of decision-making, the policies and programs that Rebecca's talking about, that there isn't a sense of urgency that I think we need to have, that we need to see at this time. We're seeing action, the Inflation Reduction Act and other, legislation. It is coming about, but is it enough? And so that's what's keeping me up at night. Is, are we doing enough? And we can do more and we can do it faster.
Yeah, for me, I think the concern is almost all just human behavior, human nature side of things. So there's a tendency, it's pretty well documented in peer-reviewed research, the half-life of remembering how bad a natural disaster was is a pretty short half-life. And it's been a trend for quite some time that folks are reluctant to reinvest in infrastructure. The numbers sound really big. People in my roles might not do the best job of motivating people or communicating why is this an investment. So really what keeps me up is that infrastructure for the last 50 years has been treated really in a way that's fostered poor decision making. My analogy many people have heard is the mindset with infrastructure, to me, just looking at it when I get outside of my professional role, is we bought a new car. We know we got to change the oil, it costs a little money, whatever, 0.5% of your purchase value. And oh God, the brakes went. Who's ever been in the shop and said, well, how far can I go on 5 millimeters? Right. So the problem is infrastructure has been treated like, I'll just buy a new car after the brakes fail and I total my car. And we all know that's not what we do with our cars. We all know that eventually I got to suck it up because I get value out of my investment by, if I can make that car last 5 extra years, the math works out a lot better for us. It's incredibly difficult to take Jim Nash's infrastructure system you've got to have $1 billion worth of stuff. It's incredibly difficult to figure out what's the right amount of reinvestment and to convince people how to do it. Yet that's a challenge we have to do. So what keeps me up is we have this human nature thing, and we also, as people, professionals, people in the industry who really, really care, we have a hard time communicating why it's important to invest in a way that my mom can understand, and we've got to test drive stuff with our parents and our kids to really validate, is our communication style good? But that's really what keeps me up. We just don't have a good agreement between the folks who are spending the money and making the decisions and the folks who are providing funds.
Thank you all. So kind of segueing from the nightmare scenarios, maybe keeping us up at night, I wanted to kind of touch base with Rebecca first on this idea that, again, at the watershed scale, flooding doesn't respect boundaries at all, right? Like it's a physical process. So can you give us an insight on how communities, because you have that kind of perspective, how communities can work between each other to kind of address these larger scale issues?
Yeah, I can share a few examples of how I see it happening, how I think it could happen. But by and large, it doesn't happen as much as it should, right? We all learn in grade school that water runs downstream, it runs downhill. Water moves irrespective of our political municipal boundaries. And yet we manage water at the municipal scale. Our counties, our cities, villages, townships are all making decisions somewhat independently about stormwater, wastewater, drinking water, natural resource management, land protection, all of these things. And in doing that, we really limit the potential that we have collectively to address an issue like flooding, to address issues like water quality. So I think we need to do more of it. Our organization, the Huron River Watershed Council, was established in the 50s because there were interjurisdictional disputes. There was a drought at the time. There was disputes about quality of water and quantity of water coming downstream, and they needed a body to broker these conversations among the municipalities. And, you know, that is still true today. So what does that look like? You mentioned the dam operators network. That's one way that we've been trying to coordinate water management across. You know, we have 17 dams on the main stem of the Huron River. There's 10 different owners of those dams, and they, for the most part, maybe with the exception of the immediate downstream dam, they operate in isolation, and they operate for their single purpose, whether it's hydropower or maintaining a lake level for recreation. And if you think about how problematic that could be, when the big rainfall event happens, right? When there's a potential dam breach or extreme flooding event coming, if you're all operating in isolation, I'll frame it the opposite. If they're acting in coordination, there's things that could happen that could mitigate the impacts of that rainfall event. In the absence of that, you don't have that power. So that's something that we're missing without that kind of coordination. Another example that I don't see happening enough, but it does happen in this country and other places is, you know, what happens upstream absolutely impacts downstream. In the Huron, our downstream is very built up. It's Wayne County. It's a lot of pavement, but our upstream in Livingston and Oakland is quite, you know, there's still a lot of natural lands. But as there's development pressure, and you get more build out and more pressure to build out those areas, we're losing kind of the absorptive quality of our headwaters of our watershed, which exacerbates flooding down in Wayne County. So, you know, in some places on the map, people will actually invest in land protection outside of their boundaries, right? So yeah, you want parks in your backyard and greenways, but what's the value of protecting land upstream to reduce your flood risk? So that's another example of how we could be working across boundaries to better address the problem.
Yeah, thank you. And, you know, kind of building up on that, it's a lot of times it seems like flooding is solved at this larger scale. You know, we're looking at the problem at a large scale. We're looking at infrastructure, which is really large. And, you know, Evan, so the people that experience flooding, though, are residents, are individuals. So how does one get these voices heard when making these big decisions about what to invest in and how it's all going to come together? Because, you know, these pipes are big in some cases. So
Right. So I'll start with the simplest answer. I mean, those of us who are decision makers have to be laser focused on listening first. A lot of times you can have a pretty good idea of what a typical solution might be, but we have to listen first. But I want to just step back to overlap with some of what Rebecca said. Again, the human nature comes into play kind of in two ways in this. You know, one issue with communities working together, particularly if there's a, you know, combined sewer overflow issue to solve. And again, I'll point to Jim Nash, my counterpart in Oakland, because he deals with this much more than I do, as does Patrick in Wayne County. There's a human nature desire to win. And when you're talking about, we've got to make an investment of $250 million to make something happen, the human nature of wanting to win and how do we divide up who pays for which part is one of the reasons why the federal courts were involved in an awful lot of combined sewer overflow removals in the last 20 years. Somebody had to be the referee and solve that. And that dynamic still comes into play when you have a group of people who have a problem and you have an agency who's tasked with providing services. There's a lot of dynamics that get in the way of collaborating towards a solution. So what I would say is just the generic approach that I like to use is to start off, for probably 20 years, I've been starting off, here's a public meeting and people are coming in. My strongest preference is to not have a presentation in the first meeting where frustrated, angry people have to wait 45 minutes to say their piece. My preference is, and I've got a guest from the city of Ann Arbor here. We've done this before. We have a bunch of aerial images in the room, and as people show up, they're immediately escorted to a table and given a Sharpie. draw where your problem was, draw what you saw. And that really helps start off a meeting with a good tone, but you still have to explain that there's limitations. The 100-year storm is not something that is feasible or practical to provide as a service. It's not affordable type of thing. So I guess in the long run, I'm saying you start with the listening, and my experience has been over and over and over. The least number of meetings you should be counting on when you're trying to reach a mutual solution is 3. And that's the least. And a lot of times you need more than that. You need to have a meeting that's 100% dedicated to listening. Nobody's going to try. Have you ever tried this at home? Somebody presents you with a problem and you answer the problem with the solution, you know, that's the right one before they finish telling you the problem. How does that work for you? You know, we can't do that with the public either. If it doesn't work at home, it's definitely not going to work in the meeting room. So meeting 1 is listening. Meeting 2 also should not be problem solving unless you're in a unique situation where you all already agreed. Meeting 2 is validation. This is what we heard you say. You drew on the maps. We've compiled the maps. Did we get it right? You know, it's that Stephen Covey thing. It's not just listen first. It's also confirm what I hear you saying is this. You might be ready for, you know, proposing some ideas or solutions at meeting 3, but you got to agree on the problem first. And you can only do that if you really focus on the listening. And I think that's the key. And you've really got to invite people in early on.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. Actually, how common are these Sharpie type meetings that you've seen around? Because I think I've seen one of them, been in one of them. They're quite engaging. Like, is that like a typical mechanisms that folks use, or is it just?
If you're in planning circles, it's a mechanism that's been used for quite a while. The drop-in charrette, we're not going to tell you you have to be there at 7 and we're going to do this, this, and this until 8. Hey, drop by. Say your piece if you want to stay for 5 minutes or 55 minutes. So the planners have been doing this for a very long time. I've been familiar with it for 20 years. I have no original ideas. I've stolen everything that works from somebody else.
Do people ever come in and mark the part that works really well?
Never,
Right.
never, right?
Transition.
Nobody wants to talk about what's going good. And that's, you know, and that's not our job to get into that type
Sure.
of stuff.
Sure. So kind of transitioning a little bit, you know, we talked about, we're joking around a little bit about technology, but definitely nature-based solutions. Like, Irma, I'm curious, what role does policy or regulation play, or, you know, does it hinder or help when it comes to implementing solutions on the ground? And, you know, what's your overall perspective on that?
Policy makes a huge difference, but I do want to give a plug. I do also like Covey, and one of my favorites is seek first to understand. I think that's very powerful. But in terms of the policies and regulations, we need to have guidance and we need to have policies. Otherwise, we have people kind of doing anything, whether it's helping or hindering. You know, we need to be able to have a guidepost and some limitations on what is being done. So I see policies from the perspective of 2 things: mitigation and also adaptation. And I think clearly we have to focus on both, and perhaps mitigation the most. We can do these adaptation practices. We can do things with the fact that we know there's going to be more flooding or there's going to be warmer temperatures. But I don't think we can build our way out of this. We really do have to. And the experts are telling us we have to lower the temperature of the globe. So we have to do something about greenhouse gases and mitigation. And that means things like protecting our forest and protecting our wetlands, reducing our use of fossil fuels. Can we just do that will people do that out of the goodness of their hearts? No, we've got development pressure, and we have an industry, oil and gas industry, that will produce it as long as they possibly can. So yes, we need policy and we need regulations if we're going to address impacts like flooding, et cetera. But the adaptation is important. We also should not wait for them to do the right thing or to do that which is going to be effective. We also need to address, because it's happening. And so adaptation policies, practices, funding are also important. As you mentioned earlier, you know, I am a big fan of nature-based solutions and increasing increasing green space, and those things that will continue to capture carbon and also to infiltrate our stormwater in the case of flooding. But we also, I think, need to look at land use policies and zoning ordinances. Again, the development pressures are there. We like development. It brings jobs, it modernizes, and people benefit from these things. But at the same time, how are we impacting the land and the space? Can we do it in a way that's more efficient? And our policies and practices, regulations will help us do that. In Detroit, for example, we have the post-construction stormwater ordinance. Big fan of that, because for any new development or redevelopment that disturbs more than a half acre of land, they have to manage stormwater on site. And so there are some alternative things that can be done, but this is an example of an ordinance of policy that can help us to reduce the flooding and to be more resilient.
Irma. So kind of jumping off of that, when we're talking about policies, kind of curious about policy at the watershed scale. Like, are there mechanisms that could be put in place to sort of promote cooperation, or, how do you think about policy at this kind of multi-stakeholder scale?
Yeah, so of course there is no watershed scale policy, right? So we work both at the local level and the state level on policy issues to, like create the enabling conditions to do the good work. And Irma hit on a couple of really good ones. There is a lot of local control in Michigan about, that can work in favor of reducing flood risk and flood impact, and zoning and ordinances are really powerful tools. Development in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, but we would far rather see a few highly dense urban developments and lots of rural than a watershed covered in suburban and exurban, density that's inefficient from an infrastructure perspective, and it's really detrimental in terms of dealing with flooding. So at the local level, we work on issues like density, and then also ordinances where municipalities opt to set setbacks. In other words, they don't allow development within 100 meters of a riverfront or a wetland, and things like this can really help the bigger picture, the watershed scale work we need to do on flooding at the state level. There's a lot there. A couple of examples where we're working actively. There's something called the Lake Level Control Act. This comes into play with our dams. Lake Level Control Act mandates lake levels in impoundments, so the lakes behind dams. This is for recreation purposes. Okay, so that boat owners and dock owners have a reliable water body, water level. But it really comes at a cost from a whole bunch of other things, including the ecological health of the system, but also our ability to respond to an event. So say we did see that, 500-year event coming, and we can flood forecast. We don't always know how big or when, but we have a lot of technology that helps support the knowing. Those dams cannot release water in anticipation of an influx and be legally compliant with the Lake Level Control Act. So this is an example of a policy that exists for one purpose that totally breaks down,
right,
when you're looking at other things. The other thing that comes to mind is it's kind of where policy hits practice, our state revolving loan fund. And we're talking about all this infrastructure money coming to our state. Most of that money goes to gray solutions, our pumps and pipe solutions. We need to, and that's not all the tools we have in our toolbox. So those programs need to be expanded to give weight to things like land protection, green stormwater infrastructure. So that's another way that policy is hindering us right now.
Yeah.
And I'd like to chime in real quick
Please,
on policy too. So a lot of times people think of policy as regulatory, and I just got to say regulatory is awesome for setting a minimum standard and a low bar, but you're never going to really substantively move the needle quickly, because a regulatory limit ensures you at all times, everyone's not in compliance. So the best you're going to get is a little worse than the regulatory piece. We need carrots and we need what I'll call tipping points. A carrot is this grant gives you 10 extra points if you're coming in a collaborative way. If you have 5 entities working together or 2, do you get different points? Let's incent people to work together, not disincent that. And then when I say there's tipping points, we've got pathways in our ordinance, you know, like Detroit, we've upgraded our ordinances. We require infiltration unless you can prove that that can't happen. There are sites where it can't happen, but we've also said, but if you're a site where it can't happen, you're going to have to make your detention basin bigger than the calculations say, because we know more rain is coming. We've chosen 20% as our number. The point of that is that's a little bit of a disincentive. Here's what we found. Someone who's trying to do a development that's going to be on septics, could you dig another hole? Is there sand there? Is there sand there? Somebody who's building a development is being required to infiltrate. It's like, we didn't find any sand. They're not looking very hard, but that one little thing incents them to look a little harder for sand, because it's more expensive to dig a hole than to soak water into the ground. And we're hoping that we feel like that has helped a little bit. So those 2 things are important to push people in the right direction without it being a total regulatory piece.
Yeah. And speaking of something, I'll get back to you in a second about another question that, that I had for you, but like kind of building up on these kind of solutions to these issues, Irma, we're looking at a near certain increase in rainfall, coming up in the future. And so the thing I'm wondering is just what mechanisms do you see, maybe your group or you personally see as some of the most promising ones that can help us address some of these issues?
So I see resiliency as the capacity to recover quickly. I think that's right. We want to look at mechanisms to support resiliency, right? Okay, just make sure I had it right. But I just, I looked at or just thinking about, well, who do we know has the capacity to, in fact, do that, to rebound fast and efficiently after a disaster, flooding or other. And it seems kind of evident to me. It's those who can afford insurance. It's those who have funds and resources to replace and repair the damage that's done. But also people who have a social network, right? You've got family or friends, someplace that you can go and stay. We had a power outage a couple of years ago in February. I did, and it lasted 8 days in February. And I don't really have family here. So my son and I stayed in the house. Now, part of it is I really could have found somewhere to go. Seriously, could have gone to a hotel, but he didn't want to. And so we stayed. But I keep, what about those, who really don't have anyone that they can call upon or go to? And leaving your home, that's kind of tricky, right? Because you worry about your contents and whether or not, it'll be safe or there when you return. But having a social network is key. The support from social welfare agencies, social services agencies. I think we're blessed with that here in this country. We do have a pretty decent network of those types of agencies, of NGOs, nonprofits, community groups, faith-based organizations. So I think that we're pretty well situated, I think, in that regard. Although, again, sometimes people don't know about these resources. But other things we're like in Detroit, we're starting to create resiliency hubs because we've had a big problem, right, with flooding and with natural disasters. Well, not, the heat waves and that kind of thing. So cooling centers, places where people can go, those who don't have the internet, they can go somewhere to get information or to share with their family that they're okay after a disaster. And then, of course, local, state, and federal support. With the flooding we had a couple of years ago, FEMA came in and declared a disaster area. But those procedures were not necessarily easy for people to deal with. And so we need to, it's good to have those resources, but we also need to make it where people can take advantage of it when they're under duress and not have that add to the duress. And then also emergency response plans. Those I think sometimes get put on the shelf, but with climate change, it is more and more municipalities and agencies are bringing those out and having drills and, and including community members in the process of creating emergency and rapid response plans to help people during the crises. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you, Maria. This is some great examples. I wonder, like when we think about resilience broadly, and I'll go to Evan because I think you probably have a specific kind of take on this. But what do you think are the biggest barriers to achieving resilience to flooding in our region?
Yeah, so I'm gonna change my answer to what keeps me up at night.
Sure.
American Society of Civil Engineers has been doing a report card for some time on infrastructure, right? So Michigan has been tied for last, not last, but tied for last, or last equal, as they say down under, for quite some time with a D overall. The worst performing area of infrastructure is stormwater. It's gotten a D minus. So we're talking about, there's no future forecasting and what are the trends going forward in the ASCE report card. It's where are we at today? So today we're at the worst grade level of all the infrastructure in Michigan, in the state that's worst rated in the whole country. And we have a bunch more rain coming. That's what keeps me up at night. I said it a different way, but
Yeah.
so the barriers are back to some of the things I touched on before, the human nature and a little bit of what I'll say is cognitive dissonance between those of us that are responsible for systems and people who are negatively impacted. No argument about the negative impacts, but things were built for thus, they have gotten worse, and thus is not the 100-year storm. This is not, we're not on the same page with what the deal is, with what the promise is. And credit to places like the city of Ann Arbor or city of Grand Rapids, who have gone through a process to for various pieces of infrastructure to basically go through what they call a level of service, to talk to people about what do you expect, to tell them what it would cost to get this level, or this level. And that does change what people are asking for and expecting, and that creates more closure. Other countries will, for example, allow citizens to do a budget exercise to realize there isn't enough money right now to make all the things the way you want. Which ones are we going to have the pools open 3 days a week for a half a day, or are we going to have better roads? Those are your choices type of thing. So
Yeah. Thanks, Evan. We're gonna open it up for questions right now. There's already questions streaming in from the internet. I want you all to think for a second. If you want to raise your hand or type it up in the Q&A, I'll pull that up in a second. But real quick, while people are asking questions, Evan, you mentioned, real quick, you mentioned the ASCE report card. I have just and I realize that's a really important tool for policy making and a kind of driving. And I'll just leave these questions up here. Driving home certain important things that need to be done from an educational perspective. I feel like sometimes the report card backfires a little bit because it makes it seem like if you want to join this field, it's just falling apart like civil engineering, right? Like if you're a young person trying to decide between majors, going to a field that's getting a bunch of D's for all the work they're doing is kind of, so I like, it's a really, really important policy tool for senators and people to sort of get funding in, but there's a slightly different perspective that we've been seeing on the educational side. Just kind of sharing that. I don't know if that solves anything, but anyway, kind of an interesting observation.
I have 2 words to
Yeah,
answer that.
go for
Job
it.
security.
Jobs.
I moved to Michigan in 1989, and my first task was throwing smoke bombs in sanitary sewers to find out how leaky they were. Because I'm a little slow on the uptake, it took me 3 or 4 years to realize this will never be done before I retire. And that really drew me to, I'm going to learn about this because I think there's a future for me here. I'm a little bit of that optimist person, as you can hear. So, but I totally hear you. And it's the same we have with the Watershed Council on water quality. If we say things have gotten a lot better, do people decide, oh, well, I can just throw stuff out the window again? I mean, I don't need to pick up my dog poop now. Things are better. So you run into this by laying out information and interpreting it.
Yeah.
What message are you sending, and does it actually slow down your progress or speed up your progress? And if I had the magic wand, it was where is, for the university involvement, it's how can we get better help from folks who are experts in social sciences and behavioral types of things. That to me is the magic wand for a lot of the things I've mentioned.
Gotcha. So I guess I want to see, first of all, if anybody wants to raise their hand, you have any question for our panelists, ideally you address it to an individual panelist so we can kind of get the conversation going. Otherwise, I'm happy to read off from a bunch of questions. So does anybody in here have a question they want to ask? Anybody want to be the first one? Or it can also be a public hearing, like, we can speak a little bit. It's okay. It's part of a conversation. So yeah, Commissioner Nash.
Well, sure, I think all three of you have your own points. Brent, we need new technology. New technology is going to help us not only, well, first, we have to identify where the problems are, where things are going to be affected by, climate change and so on. But we also need to use nature in the best way we can to protect nature when we've already screwed up so bad. And also we need people. The people have to lead this. You mentioned, Bronco, that there's interests that want to keep burning fossil fuels until they have to go underground, because that's what they're making their money from. It's hard to convince somebody that everything they make all their money from is not good when they make all their money from it. So we need to find a way, and I think young people are really going to be. I tell people all the time, young folks, that my generation left tremendous problems you have to fix, and I want to help as much as I can, but you're the ones that are going to have to do it. And I talk to folks all the time, like you, who are doing that, are completely inspired to do the right thing. So many young people that I meet are really inspired, incredibly intelligent, and they can work on it. But we have to convince everybody. For a long, long time, our infrastructure, nobody sees it. So it's easy to say, we don't have to spend that much money. The true cost of service is something that we have been following for 50 years. And we have to do that. We have to make people understand. You start with the activist community, with what I would call the conservation community. Those are two parts of what people pushing this. But how can we make sure that our universities are everybody working to make people understand the scale of what we need to do? And I've seen this thing more aware of fresh water than any place I've lived in my life. I live East Coast, West Coast, and the South. Nobody really understands that. When we passed that millage years ago, it had 75% support because people they understand that they got to protect their water. So how can we make that happen in our whole society, starting with politicians, local level, state, federal level, understand it? How do we do that? How can we make that happen?
I'd like to just take a quick crack at that, Bronco. You're going to say something first, though.
Yeah, I was going to actually kind of take what you said and then I'll follow up with you in a second. Like you mentioned the impact that young people can make. And there's a question up here about what can an individual community member do? And as I'm looking at the questions streaming in from Zoom, the students have a habit of asking these questions like, what can students do? Right. And so maybe with Irma, like when it comes to individuals who are really wanting to make some difference or feel like they're making a difference, like, do you have some insights on how a student or an individual community member can get involved in these issues and feel like they're contributing?
Oh, for sure. Well, first of all, we've heard it. This is an all hands on deck moment. Everybody has to do something. I don't know that I believe that I don't feel comfortable saying it's up to you, young people, to take care of this. So as long as I have breath, I will be fighting right along with you. I have retired 5 times and I still come back. And that people know the truth. I've said it, but I'm not doing it, and not until that we I can look back and say we've had some success here, right? But to your question,
Yeah.
I think young people, what you did this couple of weeks ago, voting makes a huge difference, because again, these are the policymakers, these are the people who are making decisions that impact what we do. And so voting for those who are interested in moving the needle on climate change, that's key. And if you're 18, you can do this. And then also just our day-to-day practices. I mean, it's valuable because we're teaching and we're each doing something. So whether it's water conservation, whether it's you have a rain barrel or you put in a rain garden, or you're recycling because we have microplastic problem, right? So and I'm looking at these plastic water bottles, but you know, we need to, we each can, I mean, there's so many avenues. Get involved with your local watershed council, join Sierra Club, you know, or just become part of an organization that's doing something that's, you know, that you find value, whether your thing is, you know, duck hunting or whatever it is. You know, I'm alluding to Ducks Unlimited, who's been a partner but they do great conservation work. So, I mean, it's kind of an infinite list. Make a donation, whatever or get out and just volunteer. Tell your friend, if you see someone that you think kind of doesn't understand, help explain it, you know, learn more, etc.
Yeah. And, you know, when I was in as a mom, and even prior to that, it felt really hard to fit in stuff in addition to my career. So my advice to young people is like, make a career of it, right? We all have to make a living and pay our bills. Why not spend 40 hours of your week being part of the solution? You know, not have it be a side gig, but have it be your gig, right? And you can do that in any number of sectors, right? I mean, you can do it in an area that interests you, but find your niche within your sector, within your field. I mean, I would recruit everyone I can to kind of natural resource management, the environment, social justice, these really big issues of our time. But even within corporations, the automotive industry, or wherever you are, you can find ways to move the needle within that industry and, you know, feel good about the way you're spending those 40 hours a week. So, you know, I just want to recruit more team members from our young people. But, you know, to your point too, Irma, it's like, I don't want to have to see my kids bear the burden of our bad behavior. I want to leave them something a little bit better, a little bit more easy than what I have. And I know that that's really a pipe dream. You know, these problems are huge, but that's what motivates me. And will hopefully, and I think it's what motivates a lot of people in this room.
I really appreciate the idea of making it a job as well. So, Evan, I believe you had a follow-up to Commissioner Nash.
Yeah, so I mean, if I fast forward, you know, we have more water coming and we can't send it somewhere else. So the solution piece is we've got to find ways to, you know, manage that more of that water closer to the source as we can. That means putting in new detention areas for the vast majority of all development that didn't have it. But honestly, is it inspirational to say we got to dig more holes in the ground? That's not inspirational, right? Infrastructure is just stuff. Why do we have this infrastructure stuff? Because we have community goals. The pathway down under, they've all been through this. They've been 15 or 20 years ahead of us on what Jim talked about, life cycle management. And as I traveled there 5 years ago, I'll never forget the first folks I met with. They say, well, we went to the meeting last night with one of our 5 customer communities, and we were competing against a statue. So we have to do a much better job. And again, this is where social sciences might help some of us. I understand that better infrastructure means better economic development, less car repairs. You can go down the list. Quality of life in communities is where it's at. And again, our sector might not be helping translate that as much to people to inspire, like, we want a better place to live and a better world to live in. And that inspires people. How can we connect those dots that this is work you can do? And that's really what Rebecca's talking about with find your niche in making the world a better place, because Jim's right. We're hearing more and more people coming out saying, that's what I want to do. Show me where I can do it. I honestly don't know how many people I've interviewed that they haven't ever said, I want to do exactly this to save the world. They want to save the world. Help show me how I can do that.
Yeah, that's great. So like, actually, I was going to switch to our next poll real quick, but I was going to see real quick, does anybody in the room have a question for our speakers? Yeah, Amber, please.
this is not a very diverse crowd. So how do you go into diversity? How do you make it diverse? First, also, how do you make it that is important for the way. So if you want to win for the story, you have like, okay, like think the other day, unfortunately, to my how do I make this important when you look at national hierarchy of needs, you cannot be instead of the hierarchy of needs, but the vision is being answered. So how is that translated into these communities? So in Michigan, like I heard you say, like Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids doing a great job. Those are very like communities doing very small communities. So how do we take this, which went on in this room, to communities that needed a little bit?
One of our panelists want to question.
I wouldn't mind.
Please.
So, I'm in Detroit and I feel like when I started this 10 years ago as a volunteer, we used to say, we're going to make this a movement. That was the quest. And the idea was, not a lot of people anywhere were really talking about stormwater and water sewage and climate change. But each time we've had flooding, whenever we go and we talk about air pollution and asthma rates and quality of life issues in Detroit, then you connect the dots and you say, yes, and climate change and, is impacting this. Climate change is making it worse. Climate change is causing this. So, it isn't just happening. There's a reason that it's happening. And so helping people connect the dots is helping us build the movement. And I made a list the other day of all the African Americans that I knew in the environmental field in Detroit or Detroit area. And I ran out of space on my little page. I must have had 50 names or so. There are a lot of us, and it's growing. More and more people are getting involved, doing something. But it is, for me, it's connecting dots. And then we say things like, we're here to save the planet. And I don't no longer say that. I say we're here to save us. The planet will be fine. In 30 years, I saw a documentary, maybe many of you did as well. 30 years, the planet without humans is beautiful.
Yeah, nature could take care of the problem, but it might not be the way we envisioned. That's exactly what I was thinking when that was thrown out there. I mean,
saying, so, we are here to, we're in trouble. And so, and also making that point and saying to people, this is about human life and animals, not just, saving the planet, like it's an entity out there, like we're not a part of it.
I'll share, and then kind of back on the engagement question too. Getting into neighborhoods, starting with that listening, building the trust, can help give the opportunity to connect the dots, right? And I did some work a few years back, going to different like mid-level cities, mid-sized cities throughout the Great Lakes. And we walked the municipal staff through a vulnerability assessment of their stormwater system. Said, here's what climate change is bringing, what keeps you up at night about this? What are we saying that scares you? But one of the take homes from every city we went to, over and over again, you see this message that, when we know this, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The affluent white neighborhoods, if there's flooding in that neighborhood, that's the first to get fixed, because it gets bumped up on the priority list because there's a lot of squeaky wheels. These are people with time, money, influence. They can show up and, speak out at city council meetings. They can show up at these engagement meetings, and their issues get addressed. That is not always the case for, lower income communities, communities of color. And so, how do we reach all of our communities, all of our neighborhoods, understand the issues, build the trust so that we can connect the dots and kind of build a shared set of goals around what the impacts are and how we solve them. And so, that's something I think about a lot as far as, how to make equitable progress on issues like this. Cleveland, it was one of the best examples I saw of neighborhood level engagement around climate change, climate adaptation, and neighborhood resilience. And I don't know if anybody in the audience remembers the name of this program. It's escaping me right now, but they did such a tremendous job of getting into neighborhoods, doing some listening and understanding and crafting, shared solutions at the neighborhood level that not only helped, mitigate the impacts of climate change, but also had other benefits like economic and quality of life benefits and, things that these neighborhoods wanted to see move forward as well.
Bronco, I want to be respectful of the time here, but I just want to say my short answer, and I can give several examples, but they sound kind of self-aggrandizing. Try new things, measure them, and just like Rebecca said, go find it. Go find how you're going to do that. And I feel like I've got a team that's very receptive to being nudged in different directions. The one piece that is a challenge, particularly in democratic areas, union support is important for elected officials. Most union contracts give preference to existing employees for positions. I love the idea of promoting within. It sends a message to your team. You work hard, you'll get somewhere. If you are an organization that looks like this room, how does that policy get you towards a DEI goal? That's a very difficult conflict, and Evan has no clue how to solve it. All I can say is it's an issue, and I don't know how to deal with it, but we have to try something new because that's not going to get people there.
Yeah. And, Amber, the point that we were making earlier about diversity of civil engineering as a field in general. Universities are trying already really hard to sort of have a bunch of different criteria when they're admitting students. But I think a lot of there's a case at the Supreme Court right now that can drastically change how that's happening. And so as educators, also, we have to really try to figure out how we can make sure that the student body that's sitting in class and the professionals that are going to be working as part of our field in the future represent the various communities that we're all from. And so some of those things are under our control when we're trying to recruit, and some of them are being decided at the highest levels right now in this country. And we're going to see where where that lands, but your point's really well taken. So we are officially out of time. So I wanted to just do this real quick. There's a poll going on. You can answer it throughout the session. It's a 1-word response. You can do multiple words, so they'll show up. It's a little Wordle. It's basically just asking you, like, which solutions are you most excited about? Like 1-word answer. So fill those out. We'll email those out afterwards. We were going to ask each speaker, I guess, could we do that real quick? Like just a 1 sentence, like, what are you most excited about? We can't do a long one because we're out of time. So do we want to just go around? Like, everybody has to do 1 word, so you get a whole sentence. What are you most excited about, Rebecca? Evan, what are you most excited about?
Yeah, there's more people who care.
Okay.
That's really helpful.
We got people on there. Look, made it right in the middle. Wow, we got AI. Cool. Awesome. Does anybody else want to volunteer an answer?
I'm really excited about collaboration and inclusion.
Excellent.
Yes, I'm pretty excited about Michigan legislature right now. I feel like for the first time in a long time, I feel like we have an enabling environment that might allow us to make some pretty significant changes in this space.